Welcome to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
I'm Shannon Lawrence.
And I'm MB Partlow.
Quick content warning before we get started. This podcast may contain language and disturbing content, so enter at your own risk. A quick apology. There are some sound quality issues with this episode, so we've done our best to pare them down, and we apologize for any inconvenience. Thank you for listening. Yay.
Hello.
Hello. We are here. We're
Like
recording on
Horton's
Easter. Yes. And we have a guest today, Jeff Wood. So we're going to let him introduce himself.
Hi there. My name is Jeff Wood. I write in multiple genres, but most recently writing in a genre I like to call suburban horror. And that's it.
All right. Do you have anything out that people should look for?
Well, I have no books, so don't look for those. I just tend to, write my short stories and I send them out. Just got a story accepted called Gifts. I don't think I officially say what it's in, but it's in a fairy anthology, like fairy bargains, which is a whole new genre for me. So I'm very psyched about it. And I have a story that I'm really proud of in a Canadian magazine this summer called Teeth of the Sky. It's like big, dumb 50s pulp sci-fi. So I'm quite proud of it.
I love that.
Nice.
And so, I just have, I let people know when I get a story out there and go from there.
That's what you're supposed to do, right? Like short stories. I don't think people understand how addictive it is writing short stories and getting those puppies published.
I know. It really is addictive. And because you can have like 8 or 9 out at any given time. So it's like having a pen pal or something.
Right? I think I was keeping track because I remember for a while Deanna, who's been on here, she put out how many she had, and I was like, okay. I was looking at, I think the highest I ever got at one time was like 17 stories on submission, and then those got whittled down. Yeah.
I don't think I've ever hit double digits, but I shoot for 6, and I can occasionally hit 8 or 9. But I don't have enough stories, I don't think, to get in the double digits.
Once upon a time, I had a little more time, and I milled those puppies out because I was also trying to prescribe. It's probably not Brad. Maybe it is Bradbury. There was something like write a short story a week for a year.
I think that is Bradbury.
Yeah, it might have been. And I did not make a story a week, but it's just like, no. But I got more stories out during that time because the whole point, of course, was you're honing your skill, right? During all of that. So getting out those stories, doing that each time, you refine it more and more and more and more, and you get better and better. And so that was kind of what I was following back when I, tried to be organized and achieve goals.
Well, I mean, it's not just writing the story, but learning how to send, learning who to send to, how to put together a good letter. I mean, all of that is just a long, long road of learning.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And even if you're not a short story writer, it's going to hone your craft to write short stories every little once in a while. So,
absolutely.
Get it.
I will plug. It's not done yet, but I'm about done with the first draft of a novel called Eldritch, Iowa. That I'm really, really proud of the first draft. Anyway, we'll see.
Yeah.
So I occasionally am putting my foot into trying to write a novel and having a book, just like the big boys. But
right.
Good.
I don't think I'll ever give up the short stories. I could have a billion novels out and I'd still be like, I want to write this story that I had an idea for. So I'm going to do it. I always have a billion ideas, and most of them are short story ideas. So no intentions to change that. But I will put out some novels too. And I want to do another nonfiction. A couple more.
On what?
I've been doing the various versions of defining horror and how to write horror for years now in workshops, which is how I honed the business of short stories.
It's a really good book, by the way.
Thank you.
It is. That deserves you should plug it. It's really a good book.
Thank you. But I did that after doing workshops and honing it and getting feedback, and seeing that's actually basically my outline for it, or, my table of contents, whatever, was how I put it together into the workshops. So So that,
nice.
And then probably more something on business stuff. and running it like a business. We'll see. Nonfiction's easier to write for me. I don't know. So a funny story out there, just to put in, like, before we really knew each other, but we were Facebook friends because we were in the same community.
Uh-huh.
I accidentally tagged you when I was trying to tag my husband, whose name is Jeff, right? And that was like one of our first real interactions where you were like, yeah. I don't think this was meant for me. It's not.
It's some sort of secret communication that I.
Right. So that's a good start, Then we were in a book together.
Say it again.
Yeah, what was it? It was one of the monster ones.
Oh yeah. We did a reading together for that book.
Yes,
that was a good book. Was
yours was it the road trip one we were in together, or the alien? Okay, road trip.
Road trip. I did the exit ramp story.
Yeah.
And we both read there. That was a fun night.
Mm-hmm. That was fun with Rebecca,
the book bar.
Yeah, Rebecca. Yeah, book bar with Becky Hodgkins.
Yeah. So that was fun. That was a fun event.
That was fun.
I was trying to remember. I was like, I'm pretty sure we have we're at least in one book together, and finally remembered it. But yeah, I missed book bar too. That makes me sad. That was
that was such a good. I'm not even in Denver, and that was just such a good spot for everything. I just wandered in there and saw Denver Horror Collective. I thought, man, these guys are cool because they're like putting out their own anthologies. It was just such a. Yeah, I just learned a lot about the writing scene in Denver.
Okay, that's how you found out about Denver Horror Collective, huh? When they were there?
Yeah, during a reading there. I think my wife and I just showed up one day, and there was a DHC thing going on. So yeah,
very cool. I ran into them at Pikes Peak Writers Conference. That's how I found out about them.
Oh,
they came in because they came in into. I was presenting there, and so I was doing my little signing time that nobody came to, and that's how it is with the single ones. They're like, nobody comes unless you're a bigger name, and that's fine. They've tried to fix that since then. But he came in and invited me to submit to that first anthology, and then all hell broke loose after that, and I never got to submit to it or whatever, but that's how I became familiar with them. Because then my dad was dead less than a month later. Not to bring it down.
That conference.
I had a gallbladder infection, insanely bad at that conference. So story never got written for Denver Horror Collective, but I'm still a member.
That was quite the memorable, because that conference started, 3 days after my mother's funeral. So.
Oh man, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was not. Yeah.
But yeah, and are you in the HWA or no?
Yes.
Okay.
No, I don't participate a lot, but yeah, I'm there.
Yeah, I left it when I left as the co-chair to remove myself from. That's what I did with Pikes Peak Writers too. I removed myself completely after I'm stepping down from. I know, spirit fingers here. When I step down from something, because if you stay, you will get hit up for things. But if you just completely sever things for a little bit and then drift back in, then you don't get asked for quite as much.
I'll try to remember that.
Yeah, we can serve as a warning. That's not the word I want.
Get sucked in over a precautionary tale.
That's it. Cautionary
tale.
There we go.
I could serve as a cautionary tale on several different topics.
I'm going to make a t-shirt that says precautionary tale. Just because I'm going to put that with executive disorder. Those will be t-shirts. I'm going to make both of those.
Make big money.
Yeah. So we're recording on Easter. I think we already said that. And you actually did you got grandkids, so you got to do actual Easter today.
Yeah, I did. It was kind of unexpected because I was expecting my grandkid, but now there were two other little kids in tow, and my daughter brought me I think literally 75 I usually would bake them myself, but pre-filled eggs, and so they're just strewn all over the backyard. And then this, there was a bobcat in the yard this morning. So,
yeah.
But it's fine. It didn't eat any of the children, but it was kind of a.
It's good.
Oh, good, honey. There's a bobcat in the yard we're about to hide a bunch of eggs in.
It's fine. I feel like we probably wouldn't be recording if it had get eaten the children.
That's
but
true.
You don't know.
It'd be on the front page of the news instead.
Right. I remember who was I was talking to somebody yesterday about when ours were little. I think we went to one public Easter egg hunt one time, and then I was like, never again. Because children were insane little piranha or whatever. Clump, 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 clump. And it just so vicious for the eggs. And my kids were like, what is this?
So in our house, I was so insane. So we did hiding the eggs in the backyard and all that. Well, when the girls got just a little bit older, what would happen was they would get up and they would each have one egg, and they would open the egg and there would be candy in it and a clue. So it was like a scavenger hunt to find the Easter basket. And let me tell you, long about the last year I did that, I was like, whose fucking idea was this? And Joe's like, I believe it was yours. Because I got so tired of trying to make, because they rhymed and they were clever. And I was like, I've used up all my cleverness. Every bit.
The extent I went to when the kids were younger and I had all this energy, like leprechaun footprints and leprechaun traps. Same. And then all these.
I would spend hours on the particularly leprechauns, but like I would like turn all the furniture around or upside down. And they finally found out they had like leprechaun traps they made for school.
Yeah.
And so I put all the chairs in the house, all the like kitchen table chairs on top of the kitchen table, and then put their traps on top of that. And I put a little sign that said, ha ha ha, the leprechauns or something, and they recognized my handwriting. That's how they found out there was no Santa, because they went, oh, if there's no leprechaun, then I bet it's Dad doing the Santa too. So like everything fell apart like a house of cards with that, just because they recognized it.
That was what did me. And one of them, it was probably Lucy, said, the Easter Bunny's handwriting looks a lot like yours.
So my son, the oldest, has always been over analytical, right? Very serious and over analytical. And he, from the beginning, was set out to determine that everything was fake. So, for example, even the tooth fairy, he would hide his tooth. So here I am trying to sneak in to get a tooth. And it's not in his, and I'm like, oh no, and I'm trying to look for it and not wake him up. And no, he had like put it somewhere to trick the tooth fairy to make sure, was this a magical being or not? And like he would ask every single year, is Santa real? And I would say, do you want Santa to be real? Because it's up to you whether he's real for the next for this Christmas. And he'd say, all right, I want him to be real this year. And I was like, he didn't really believe in any of that stuff. But yeah, the Easter Bunny, all of that. He was always trying to catch us out. I had to be like savvy about everything. I was like, I didn't even want to lie about this stuff in the first place. Now I'm being tested. But yeah, the tooth fairy, he was the worst about the tooth fairy because he was like, I'm surprised he never set a deadly trap or something. He would rig something.
Severed hand.
Yes. And so it was like my own little horror story there, hoping, will I even be able to find the tooth? And then I tried doing here's a chest that you can put the tooth in, and here's where we'll put the chest. And he was like, nah. Down, and I was like, you're way too smart for your own good, and I don't appreciate it. This isn't work.
It would take us several days, or sometimes several days, to like remember to actually do the tooth. So the tooth fairy is really forgetful.
Yeah, our tooth fairy was too. We almost got caught out for the Easter Bunny one year because the weather was good. Because you never know here. And we're out in the backyard, and the girls had gone to bed, and we're out in the backyard hiding the eggs. And Lucy opens the back door and says, Mommy, Daddy, what are you doing in the backyard? And I said, Joe and I looked at each other, and I said, somebody just drove down the alley and threw trash in our backyard.
That's good.
We're picking it up.
Kids really it looks so easy in the movies.
It does.
It's not easy. But my daughter would have believed forever because she wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
My son was like, I'm going to go along with your shit, Mom, but but I don't really believe in this stuff. I'm going to hook you up because you want to do this with parents or whatever. So, yeah. I miss it and I don't miss it.
Yes.
Yeah, miss it and you don't at the same time.
Yeah. All right. I feel like that's a good spot.
Yes.
To transition to something horrific.
Yeah, cool.
So, yeah, I'll go ahead and start mine. It starts with my birthday. On November 20th, 1977, while I was busy being born in a California military hospital, 3 grisly discoveries would be made by police in Los Angeles about 389 miles away. These bodies would be a turning point in the investigation of a rapid spree of murders committed by a perpetrator called the Hillside Strangler. The murders had started in mid-October. The first known victim was 19-year-old Yolanda Washington, who was found the same day she disappeared, October 17th. Her body was found on a hill at Ventura Highway and Forest Lawn Drive and had been intentionally positioned in a lewd way. It was clear she'd been raped, beaten, and then strangled. Ligature marks were found on her neck, both ankles and both wrists, known as 5-point ligatures, showing she'd been tied up. She was nude and her body had been cleaned before it was dumped. There was some dispute as to whether she was actually a strangler victim because she was the only Black victim, but it's pretty clear she was when you hear about the rest of these. As she was a sex worker, not much was thought of her death. The attitude at the time, and let's be honest, now sometimes, was that death was a risk of being a sex worker pretty much, and nobody would be bothered. Then on October 31st, another body turned up. Judith Lynn Miller was only 15 years old. She had dropped out of Hollywood High School and was doing sex work to support herself. Her tiny 90-pound body was found the same day she was taken, dumped in a flood control channel off Alta Terrace. A homeowner had found her covering her body with a tarp before police got there because children were passing by to go to school. Oh. Her ligature marks were similar to Yolanda's, and she had been posed with her legs put into the shape of a diamond. She had been raped and sodomized before being strangled. Like Yolanda and the victims who would follow, she had the 5-point ligature marks. She'd been seen on Sunset Boulevard talking to 2 men in a 2-toned sedan before her disappearance. Certain patterns would be repeated with the strangler victims. 5-point ligature marks, they were often beaten, they were always raped, and they were sometimes sodomized and or tortured. They were killed one place and dumped in another, usually on a hillside or slope of some sort. Almost all were killed by strangulation. So I'm saying that now so I don't have to list it every single time I talk about a different victim, because they had a really high body count in a very short period of time. The next death followed quickly. 21-year-old Alyssa Teresa Caston, or Lissa, worked in North Hollywood as a waitress and a dancer for the LA Knockers. I love that.
Oh my God.
An all-female cabaret dance troupe. And she disappeared on November 5th after getting off work at the restaurant. She was found on the 6th. Her car had been abandoned on her street. She'd almost made it home. On November 9th, 28-year-old Evelyn Jane King disappeared. She would not be found until November 23rd, too decomposed at that point to tell exactly what had happened. She wanted to be an actress, and she was already a Scientologist. I guess I thought that people didn't do that really until after, but I guess it makes sense that you'd sign on Scientology in the hopes that you'd meet the people that would get you into movies. On November 13th, 2 young girls, 12-year-old Dolores Ann Dolly Cepeda and 14-year-old Sonia Johnson, disappeared after boarding a bus from Eagle Rock Plaza to head home. There was basically a mall that they'd gone to visit. It was supposed to be super safe. There was security there. They got off the bus and were seen talking to men in a 2-tone sedan. They would not be found until November 20th and would be the second and third bodies discovered that day. A 9-year-old boy found them while treasure hunting in a pile of garbage by Dodger Stadium. Oh. So another traumatized kid. It was their ages that finally shook up Los Angeles and made them desperate to find the killer, because nobody cared about slightly older women even, because one was 15 and didn't care if they were sex workers. The other body found on November 20th, this time by hikers, was that of 20-year-old Christina Weckler. She had disappeared that day. She was an honors student at the Art Center College of Design. For some reason, she'd been treated very differently from the previous victims, and nobody pointed this out. So I was reading and I kept looking, because I was like, surely somebody commented on this. They'd all been strangled to death. It appeared more time had been taken with her. Multiple ways were tried to murder her. She had been sodomized
Oh.
so badly that blood was still leaking from her rectum when she was found. She did have the 5-point ligature marks. Her breasts were noticeably bruised, and an examination showed the strangler had injected her with Windex, likely as a form of torture, not to actually kill her, and had then asphyxiated her using a gas oven. Her nude body was found near her home in Glendale, positioned under a bush on a hillside. The amount of torture makes me wonder, like, what happened? Like, something happened. They were pissed. This wasn't their routine thing that was happening here. So I kept digging, and I did find that she was actually a neighbor of Bianchi. She lived in the apartment next door to him. So I'm thinking maybe they had an interaction. Maybe he asked her out and she turned him down. Something had happened, because this was personal. This was the most personal of all of these. Along with the body of Evelyn King, Christina, Dolores, and Sonia were all found within 3 days of each other. 4 bodies in a week was incredibly shocking to the populace. It was after the discovery of Evelyn's body that a multi-department task force was put together to officially seek the Hillside Strangler. 18-year-old Lauren Ray Wagner disappeared on November 28th. She was a student at a business school. Her body was found November 29th. Most of them were found within a day. The insides of her hands had been burned, likely using an electrical cord. Instead of being bound with rope and tape, it looked like she had been handcuffed. Most of them had rope, at least on their wrists and their necks, and often duct tape around their ankles. Police had become so shook up that they told women not to stop for police anymore. They straight up in LA said, that's it. Don't pull over for us. What you need to do is drive until you get to a public place, go home, or go to a police station if a cop tries to pull you over. Because it was theorized that the perpetrator might be a cop or someone who knew something about police methodology anyway. And I'm here to say, this is still a good idea, ladies.
Yes.
This is not the only situation. We've seen so many people fake being cops, buy used cop cars at auction afterward, and use those to commit crimes. Don't stop in the middle of nowhere for a cop. They're going to have to understand you shouldn't get in trouble for it. And if you do, go to the news. So something that pissed me off about her abduction was that it was witnessed and nobody got a call about it. She'd actually arrived home. Her car was found the next morning, parked across the street. The driver's side door was open. And it wasn't until police actually canvassed physically and knocked on a woman's door that she was like, oh yeah. I saw her being taken. I saw she was being abducted. She called out, you won't get away with this. I heard this. And she gave them a description of the perpetrator. She said one was tall and young, the other one short, older, and had bushy hair. And I'm just like, why the hell didn't you call the cops?
What? Yeah. Did she ever say why?
No, not that I could find.
That's unbelievable.
Yes. I'm just like the audacity. And I think if I were that awfully human, I wouldn't admit it afterward.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that pissed me off. It's just really, the strangler wasn't done yet. On December 13th, 17-year-old Kimberly Diane Martin disappeared. Kimberly was an aspiring model who also did sex work. She was found 1 day later showing signs of torture. Found seems like a strong word, though, because her body was dumped over a hill near the Los Angeles City Hall, and it landed where it was directly visible from police headquarters. So I was like, they didn't do that on purpose. I feel like they probably did.
Yeah.
Kind of to mock them. Kimberly had intentionally worked for a call girl agency, whatever one would call that, due to her fear of the Hillside Strangler, who was picking up women working on the street. So she had signed up with this agency. And the good thing is, and she was the only one who they ever called an agency for and lured out. The good thing is they had an address, 1950 Tamarond in Hollywood. Dismayingly, a woman who worked there had been concerned when she hadn't reported in that she was okay after she went out on the call. And that woman had called the LAPD not once, but over and over and over again all night. Like, are you going to send somebody out? You need to send somebody to this address. She has not come back. This isn't okay. This isn't how it works. And, at first they're saying, we'll send a car out. We'll dispatch a car as soon as we have somebody or whatever. And then they just kept stringing her along all night. And finally she calls and they're like, yeah, she's a sex worker. She's just gone to a different John. We're not gonna put any effort, even though all these women, they knew that sex workers were being killed. And so at about 3 or 4 in the morning, she called a reporter she knew and brought him out, and they were going to start looking into things. And then at about 6:30 a.m., while she's at the police department with this reporter trying to get answers, somebody comes out and says, "We found her body. She's been killed." She still feels strongly that they could have caught the strangler if the LAPD had gone out when she first called them at 10 p.m. Because the thing is, they were spending time with these women. They were taking the time to beat them, to rape them. They were very clear, by the way, in their interviews that we did it one at a time. We weren't being weird about it. The interviews with them are fascinating. Very disturbing. So when they did finally go to the address, it was found to be vacant. It had been recently broken into. The strangler called them from a payphone. There was a pause here between victims, and on February 16th, 1978, a 20-year-old waitress and student named Cindy Lee Hudspeth disappeared. Despite her body having been put into the trunk of her vehicle and the vehicle pushed off the side of the Angeles Crest Highway, she was found within a day thanks to the bright orange of her Datsun spotted by a helicopter pilot. And then the murders just stopped. It would be a year before the case broke, but instead of breaking in LA, it was in Bellingham, Washington. 2 students at Western Washington University, 22-year-old Karen Laudetta Mandick and 27-year-old Diane Amy Wilder, were found strangled in a house. Unlike the Hillside Strangler murders, a bunch of clues had been left behind. This was a much sloppier scene. These murders led to a security guard named Kenneth Bianchi. Bianchi was a mess. His crime scene was a mess. He was considered good looking and kind. Like, I saw that over and over again. They had an ex-girlfriend of his on a documentary I watched, and she was like, "He was so good to me." And I was like, "Sure, but you were also 17 and he was 25. So I feel like it wasn't perfect." No one had ever seen him act weirdly around women. Her family liked him. However, he started claiming to have a second personality, Steve Walker, while he was being questioned, and it was Steve Walker who had done the killing. He had multiple experts, and the judge confessed he had dissociative identity disorder, but not the cops. They brought in their own expert, Martin Orn, who quickly proved he was faking, as well as pointing out that the expert who diagnosed him was in the middle of writing a book about DID and was intent on having as many cases as possible. And boy, wouldn't the Hillside Strangler case be a great one to get attention for your new book? Bianchi had frequently watched both Sybil and the Three Faces of Eve. He had psychology books in his home, as well as documents that had been edited to have his name on them. These turned out, once looked into, to be from a psychology student named Stephen Walker, who had answered an ad from a Dr. Bianchi asking for applications that must include not only their resume, but their school transcripts. That he was trying to take his identity. Thoroughly busted now, Bianchi admitted he was lying. He wanted that identity, Walker's paperwork, so he could get a job as a psychologist. Not only that, but he had applied to the LAPD while committing the murders in LA, and then also to the Bellingham Police Department. It was when he did not get in as a cop that he had taken the job as a security guard. He'd previously gone to a community college in an attempt to get a degree in police science and psychology, but only made it 1 semester. He'd also applied to the sheriff's department in Rochester, New York, where he was originally from. Despite having a lot of behavior problems as a kid, he was found to have an IQ of 116 when he was 11. He was a chronic underperformer and bedwetter who had petit mal seizures and had been diagnosed with something then called passive-aggressive personality disorder. That's no longer in the DSM, by the way, because that's some bullshit.
I had so many thoughts.
I looked it up. I had to look it up because I was like, I must know more about this.
Yes.
And I was like, legitimately, you're just talking about passive-aggressive people and PTSD here. So just call it PTSD when I looked at it, because it was like they came from homes where they couldn't speak up and couldn't get upset and yada, yada. And there weren't very aggressive people. And I was like, they weren't aggressive. He was very aggressive.
I'm thinking,
what are you talking about? I did want to say, though, as a note, because he had first of all, the triad is pretty much bullshit, except for the torturing animals part of that famous triad. At this point, it's been shown that was BS. But the bedwetter thing doesn't indicate you're going to become a serial killer. But the petit mal seizures, I am familiar with petit mal seizures and dealt with it. And sometimes those lead to loss of urinary control in a given moment.
Yes.
The triad is bullshit. Tell me more about that.
Oh, yeah. No, they've just shown like the bedwetting.
What were the three?
It's bedwetting, setting fires, and torturing small animals, right? Yeah, and I forget, it has an official name, the something triad, named after somebody, but I don't remember it.
Mm-hmm.
But more and more profilers and stuff are starting to say bedwetting is not a part of this. That's just part of childhood for some people. That's not it.
I would argue so is fire setting.
But that's what they say too. Fire setting, also very normal for kids to experiment with matches and set fires, and it's fire. Adults are still like, yay, fire. So let's be real. But animal torture, pretty conclusive. If you're willing to torture an animal, there's probably something wrong with you. But yeah, more and more they're doing that. There's a cold case detective is what he was that now lives here in Colorado Springs called Paul Holes. And anytime he's asked about that, he's like, no, it's not a real indicator anymore. But again, like bedwetting, there's so many reasons for it. And I think that probably came up because the bedwetting is frequently seen in abuse, right? Like kids who are being abused will do bedwetting. And a lot of these people who turn out to be serial killers have experienced abuse. So I imagine that's why that got tied in there. And then the fire thing is just, because kids light fires. One of my brothers almost burned down the house because my parents had a candle out or whatever, and he thought it would, let me stick this piece of paper in this. And then he panicked when the piece of paper went, right? And he chucked the piece of paper,
of course,
and it went behind the entertainment center. So, like kids light fires. I remember finding matches in the woods and I don't know, trying to burn leaves or something, which could have easily led to a forest fire. But luckily that was Maryland, not Colorado. So I just think personally the bedwetting for him was probably related to the petit mal seizures. They're called absent seizures. You kind of you don't shake, right? You don't have that shaking like as people are familiar with grand mal, but you kind of, your eyes will roll back sometimes and you kind of shut down in a certain way. And it's kind of a quiet seizure. My daughter used to have them. So yeah, that I don't put much credence in meaning anything for him. I mean, he's a scumbag, but it has nothing to do with him having these seizures and being a bedwetter. So instead of DID, he was ultimately diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder and sexual sadism disorder. So we'll make a disorder out of anything. He'd taken a huge gamble when he pretended to have DID, as he had not only confessed to all the crimes and given details that only the killer could know, proving he'd been there, but he had also given the name of his cousin, Angelo Buono Jr., I should say. In 1976, Bianchi had moved from Rochester, New York to LA. He'd been working as a security guard at a jewelry store and stealing jewelry to gift to girlfriends and sex workers he frequented. He met his cousin Buono and was deeply impressed with his abilities with the ladies. He was called the Italian Stallion, and the clear signs of his success. He had he commented on, he wore a gold chain and he had that whole thing going. Plus he knew important people and owned a successful automotive upholstery shop. This would be where they later brought their victims. The victims were killed in the shop. While Bianchi had gotten in trouble for petty theft and as a kid had pulled down a girl's panties on the playground, it was really all the trouble that I saw for him in the past that he'd actually gotten caught for or gotten in trouble for. Buono, however, already had a history of rape, assault, grand theft auto, and refusing to pay child support to the multiple women he had children with.
What a prince among men.
Yeah, absolutely. Under Buono's tutelage, the two men took two teenage girls who had run away from home into a kind of captivity. These girls, Sabra Hannon and Becky Spears, were forced to do sex work for the two. They would even have parties where some of the big names came over and took turns with them. In fact, during the investigation of the two men, some dismayingly high-ranking officials had been partaking of this, including a sheriff, I believe, or a chief. However, police were so intent on solving the murders, they didn't end up following up on those leads to go after these men who were frequenting these young girls. Luckily, Becky met a lawyer who helped her escape. He found out what was going on and he was like, no, and he got her out. And after she was out, Sabre managed to also run away. Planning to get some more sex workers to pimp out, they purchased a trick list from another sex worker. That trick list was delivered by Yolanda Washington in October 1977, which brings us full circle back around to his first victim. As far as I know, they didn't end up doing any more pimping or prostitution work like that. So Buono was much more organized than Bianchi, and it's been hypothesized he was in control throughout this process, but there's never been any proof of that. When his business was searched, it was so clean that there was no sign of him there at all. He had cleaned it so clearly that his hair wasn't there, his fingerprints were not there. Like, he knew stuff was coming down on him ahead of time. Interviews with the two men showed that they had lured the women and girls into their vehicle by showing a fake badge and claiming to be undercover cops, showing that the cops' theory had been at least partially correct. Their last victim as a duo, Cindy, had the ill luck of having been at the upholstery business to get her car work done. She was just a customer. And it just so happened that Bianchi showed up while she was there talking to Buono. The two men stepped into the other room to have a talk, discussed it, and decided, yeah, let's go ahead with this one. Both men were ultimately convicted of at least some of the rapes, assaults, and murders, with Bianchi also having the two women in Washington on his list. He got 2 life sentences, and Buono got 1. Bianchi had agreed to turn on Buono in order to avoid the death penalty in Washington. There was no death penalty in California. He's getting tried for those 2 girls up in Washington that he did alone. Buono died in prison of a heart attack in 2002. Bianchi is still alive and in prison in Washington state. So from here, I just have some asides that I thought were interesting. A psychic from Germany showed up in LA at some point during the crime spree and claimed they should be looking for 2 Italians. At the time, police had not yet realized there must be 2 killers, which they discovered when realizing the bodies couldn't have been moved without any drag marks by only one person. And then like eyewitnesses saying there were 2 men in a car. All of that stuff came out later, but they kept that from the press. That was never put out in the press, anything about there being 2 people. That they'd be brothers and that they'd be around age 35. So this is actually pretty close considering that we're cousins. Italian, and in fact, Buono, at the very least, was a first-generation American. Bianchi was actually adopted. His mom had been a sex worker in issues, and she'd given him up or abandoned him when he was still a baby. And they were 25 and 43 years old, Buono being the older of the 2. He was also a shorter one with bushy hair for the witness statements there. There was almost another victim. They pulled over a 24-year-old woman, but when they asked to see her ID, a photo came out with it. It was her sitting on her father's lap. Her father was actor Peter Lorre, who had, by the way, played a serial killer or some kind of murder in M. Yeah. Good movie. Yeah. So that's what saved her, though, is they were like, if we do this press, they're going to really be after us. This is a famous person's daughter. Let her go with a warning. They did that whole thing. Wow. And so she didn't report it, never thought anything else about it until all this broke on the news and she saw them and she was like, oh my God. I came really close to being a victim.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So that was in November, right when they were like in the thick of things. Their cases took the longest of all other cases tried up to that point in the U.S., with them being charged in 1979, officially charged.
Oh, my God.
And the conviction in 1983, at least for Buono. So I don't know if that record's been beaten since then, but at the time, that was known as the longest trial ever in the U.S. The reason Bianchi fled to Bellingham, Washington in May 1978 was because he and Buono got into a fight when Bianchi revealed he had been doing ride-alongs with the police throughout the killing spree, because he aspired to be a cop. And anybody can do a ride-along. Any citizen can do a ride-along. So he's riding along with them during this while they're investigating these things.
That's crazy.
And he was like, yeah, they've been asking me some questions. And Buono was like, get out. Yeah. Buono got married while in prison to a woman who worked as a supervisor at the California State Employment Development Department, She was a mother of 3. As far as I can tell, she was still married to him when he died. Buono's grandson committed a murder-suicide in 2007, killing his grandmother, who had been married to Buono for a while and with whom he had 5 children. His grandson didn't know who his grandfather was until 2005, about 2 years before the murder-suicide. And finally, in 1980, Bianchi had a girlfriend named Veronica Compton. He managed to smuggle her a condom full of his sperm in the spine of a book during one of her visits. She lured a woman to a motel and tried to strangle her to death with the intention of planting the semen and making it look like the real Hillside Strangler was still on the loose. To be clear, they couldn't yet in 1977 and thereabouts,
Right.
test that semen and go, well, it's his, dumbass. Eventually, they would have been able to. So she wanted to make it look like he was innocent, that they'd convicted the wrong man. This was a whole plan. She said in an interview that he'd tried this with other women too, and she felt fooled. And I was like, yo, if you can be fooled like that, then try and murder a woman for that, then you're actually quite twisted. Thanks.
So can we go back to that detail? They were hiding the sperm in the
yeah. I really wanted to see like a picture, but yeah, he got the condom and tied it off or whatever, and he was able to put it in the spine.
So it slid the condom inside the spine. Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah. And then that's what she just left for the book. I know, right?
It's like
But so she failed to kill the woman. It's a lot harder than people think if you're not a complete psychopath. And she served time until 2003 for it. So she did serve time for attempted murder.
Wow.
Here's like the one factoid in all this that I'm like, is this true or not? She allegedly admitted to planning to buy a mortuary with another convicted murderer so they could practice necrophilia. That one, I'm like, I'm not putting too much, grain of salt on that.
Yeah. Ew.
Ew.
I will say she's apparently a screenwriter now.
Of course she is.
Bianchi comes up for parole this year. That's why I'm covering this. He comes up for parole in 2025.
They can't possibly.
So here's hoping. There are still family members dogged enough that they are still sticking with this. I don't blame them if they're not. You have to keep going back and going back. Or that, like some of the officials that worked on the cases, because they were completely horrified. They had to deal with these bodies. It was a horrific thing to deal with. They were traumatized. I watched this documentary on Peacock with them, and like we're talking in tears about some of this stuff, obviously clearly disturbed by this. So hopefully they're going, because this is a man that should never, ever be on the streets again.
Yeah.
You can watch that documentary, by the way. It's called Hillside Strangler, Devil in Disguise, and you will see the interviews, mostly with Bianchi, because he was the one trying to pull this, I have a dissociative identity disorder thing. And how different he is. He's, sitting there quietly and kind of slumped in his seat and everything and talking to them. And then all of a sudden he's up and he's being aggressive and he's smoking and he's, what the fuck is this? Is this an interview? Is this what? And he was like, are you Andrew Dice Clay? What's up?
Yeah.
So, but my other sources were Wikipedia, LA Times, History.com, PBS. Those are all my sources. But yeah, there were some things in there that I didn't know before. I mean, you hear the basic cases all the time. Movie Copycat is a fantastic movie. And Hillside Strangler, singular, right, is mostly what they called him, because at first they thought it was a single killer. And Copycat has them in there, has their crimes in there as something. But the thing is, movies typically show all this huge body count, we'll say, right, for serial killers. When you actually look into it, frequently it's not that big a body count, like not with the movie show. It's one person is terrible. So don't get me wrong here. But when you see the movies, like 30, they have all these victims. And in reality, it just has to be 3 to be a serial killing spree. And most of them are right around 3 for these. But these guys, I don't know why they stopped when they stopped. I mean, that fight didn't happen until a couple months after their last murder. So either that or there are crimes that haven't been connected to them, but their signature was so distinct. That's hard to think of.
Could they have slowed down because there was so much attention on the cases?
And that could be, they never really expressed being concerned about that except for the Peter Lorre thing. And yeah, supposedly Buono didn't do any more crimes after Bianchi left, and then Bianchi did his. And it took him about a year though. So there is a list of people they thought might have been there, mixed in there, but the signature just wasn't the same, the MO. And they thought the Alphabet murders might have been Bianchi's because it was back in New York at the same time. And nobody ever, I don't think they found anything compelling to say that that was so. One of the people thought to be their victims and put out there even on the news ended up being the Night Stalkers. Or no, Ramirez ended up being one of his victims. So, but when you look at the 70s and 80s in LA, they had a tremendous number of serial killers operating at the same time.
Really?
In the area. Yeah. And if you look at the Golden State Killer, he's like right there in the same. I looked at a map because I wanted to see how far where I was born was from LA to say what I said at the beginning. And like Visalia was on that route, and all of these places that come up in the Golden State Killer. Visalia is not far from LA at all. And that was the Visalia ransacker that eventually became, of course, the Golden State Killer.
Because that flows off the tongue better than the Visalia ransacker.
That one's tricky. And the ransacker was just ransacking at that time. He escalated. But that's the other thing about Bianchi and Buono. There's no escalation.
It's just
boom, that one poor victim.
Yeah.
It's just bam. They started out and it was so rapid, and that's so unusual. But they don't seem to be people who were willing to talk, you know, in the interviews afterwards to have any idea other than to know how they were getting their victims. They really didn't say. Like their motivations weren't as explored as others were. So I think they kept buttoned a bit. Don't know.
The weirdest detail in that, for some reason, or at least the one that's sticking in my mind, is the Windex. Injecting somebody in Windex seems like such a anger. I guess it wasn't incredibly angry, terrorizer.
There were 2 injection marks, so they did it twice. And some people called it an attempt. They thought they were attempting to kill her with the Windex, and that they were just experimenting with different ways of killing a person. So that was, they called it lethal injection in quotes there from some of the articles I read. So it really depends. But I'm like, I don't know. But that would have, I feel like that would burn terribly. That would be a torture. Yeah. Windex, ammonia-based, at least it was. I don't know if it still is. But yeah, like with her, I was like, how is nobody asking the question why hers was the way it was compared to everybody else's? Mm-hmm. Usually I can find at least one other person asking that question online and maybe
speculating.
Yeah, right. But no, I didn't see anything.
It always amazes me what information is there and what information is not.
Yeah.
You know, what's part of public record and people have talked about, and people will take the same little chunk of information and chew it up and spit it out over and over and over and over and over again, and won't go back to get anything original or even try to expand on what's known.
It's one of the cops in the documentary too was like, you know, there were other horrific murders happening during that time, and I don't understand why they got the focus they got. He said, because there were other crimes that should have been paid just as much attention. Mm-hmm. It's always interesting hearing from the officials who worked with this stuff afterwards and just being like, this is what the press ran with, you know, this is what caught their attention, but there were equally horrific things happening elsewhere and it wasn't hitting the news. So it's interesting, but their case also kind of does the whole. So the ongoing theory is, you know, they're just going to kill people that are the same like race that they are. And you don't see a lot of people blurring that line, but then you see some, right? There's a lot of exceptions to the rule the more you look into it. And that's part of why they tried to say Yolanda Washington wasn't one of the victims. They were like, well, she was Black and they were white. And it's like, but she was killed exactly there, and she's the only one who actually has a connection to them because she was taking on the trick list from the other sex worker. So What? I think I remember seeing that Buono ended up not charged with her murder because of all that. I don't know if Bianchi was.
Wow.
But yeah, they were they were
The
really
idea
terrible.
of a city, of a major like American city, just being like not filled with serial killers, but to have multiple serial killers stalking LA at the same time. And that
Right?
seems like it's out of just.
Well, in the Pacific Northwest has the same sort of thing, right? During that same era, the PNW was huge for this stuff. And you've got all these people, including the Green River Killer, right? Who's going to come up briefly in a bit, but operating at the same time. Bundy is operating, and all of these are overlapping.
At the time, did they know that?
I think that now, don't quote me. Green River Killer, I seem to recall being mostly 70s and Bundy mostly 80s. So I don't know if they overlapped or kind of backed up to each other.
What were the dates of Charles Manson?
He was also one of the people who was brought up as his stuff was going on at the same time. So that was also the 70s, I believe. So yeah, I found a list, like, but my piece was already so long. I was like, well, no, we don't need to go into more. There were specific other possible victims that I could have mentioned too, that they were never ones they could make stick. So, and some of them were very different. Some of them had been strangled. One girl had been picked up at the beach, stuff like that. But yeah, a lot of these people, if you look up, I'm trying to think when the I-5 killer was. I think that was more 80s. But yeah, a lot of them either bookending each other or being at the same time. It was not a good time. I was talking to my poor husband while I'm doing all the research, ends up hearing all this stuff, and he's not into this stuff. He's like, okay, great. So I was like, so this is kind of why this whole police thing started, where they tell women, like, don't pull over when you're in the middle of nowhere and you're alone in the car, even though it's a cop. Like, drive the speed limit and keep going until you get somewhere safe, right? And he's like, so women should just stay home. And I was like, well, the Golden State Killer was killing them in their homes.
Yeah.
He's like,
there are plenty of people who do that.
So he keeps doing stuff. And I'm like, well, this person did that. And he was like, so women are not safe anywhere is what you're telling me. And I was like, yes. I'm glad you figured that out. You are correct. They are not safe anywhere, not even with police. So yeah, but I don't know. I didn't know they'd pimped out people. There are a lot of stuff I didn't know about these guys that weren't floating around in the zeitgeist. All right, now we're going to go to Jeff.
If you're thinking of starting a podcast or even just starting to research it, Buzzsprout is your go-to source for information and hosting. They have tons of videos and write-ups on everything you need to know about recording and distributing a podcast, and they even provide easy ways to get analytics on how your podcast is doing. We use Buzzsprout for our podcast hosting, and through them we've been able to connect with tons of resources and distributors. Following a link in the show notes lets Buzzsprout know we sent you, gets you a $20 Amazon gift card if you sign up for a paid plan, and helps support our show. A win-win. Not only do they help you get started, but they also do small things to encourage you, such as awarding you badges as you hit various milestones. Join over 100,000 podcasters already using Buzzsprout to get their message out to the world.
Okay. My story is much shaggier and much less well rehearsed, but there is a serial killer in it briefly, maybe. So the background is, and this story might even be mostly background, I lived in Minneapolis in the 80s, or for a part of the 80s, and it was a pretty bad neighborhood called Elliott Park that is near downtown. And my job was I loved this job. Probably my favorite job in my life was working at the Bandbox, which is this tiny little diner. I guess there used to be a chain of them, but now there's just this one left. And it was like in a bad neighborhood. We were open 24/7. And so there were a lot of homeless or working poor coming in to nurse a cup of coffee. And, it was a cheap diner. We'd let them, as long as they weren't messing with people, we'd let them sit there all night. So working at this job, you kind of got to know the homeless community pretty well, and the working poor. You just got to know the residents, at least the residents of the neighborhood that came into the Bandbox. Get to know. But even without them, the Bandbox had this picture window that looked out on, I guess, Chicago and 15th Street, which is a downtown intersection in Minneapolis. And you just see the neighborhood walk by. So even if they didn't come in, you just see the working poor of this neighborhood and the homeless in this neighborhood just walking by every day. We would sell Lucy's. I don't know if you know what those are, but nobody could afford a pack of cigarettes, so we'd sell loose cigarettes at the time, called them
Oh,
Lucy's,
okay.
for a dime each, which I think is a little more than a pack at the time.
Wow.
It was just stuff like that. It was a neighborhood that kind of catered to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was a cheap bar there. There was a liquor store right next to the bar or near the bar. A cheap grocery store. It was just there to, it was a poor neighborhood, and I got to know it pretty well. My friend Ken, who shows up later in the story, actually, we used to say that if you worked at the bandbox, you were kind of like this neighborhood celebrity because you would watch them, but everybody saw you working like there at the restaurant. So you were kind of this little celebrity in your own right. And you worked there by yourself. Like you washed the dishes, you cooked the food, you did the waitering. It was a very tiny little room. So anyway, you're there by yourself, working, watching the neighborhood as the neighborhood watched you, I guess. So anyway, the bandbox eventually closed down, and this is another story that I won't tell, but so I grew up in Iowa, but then I actually decided to hitchhike from Iowa to New York City via like Canada, like going around Lake Michigan. Just an insane trip. I can't believe I did that. So anyway, so that's the setup is that I worked at the bandbox and I worked in this poor neighborhood. And so I didn't have a place to live. I was coming in town for a couple of weeks, then I was going to go straight up into Canada through Minnesota. And so my friend Ken Schaefer, who worked at the bandbox with me, said, "Come stay with me. I'm staying at this building that they're tearing down, and like they're gutting it to like make it into apartments and stuff." And he was sort of watching it as a I don't know, just living there for free rent to watch it. And so he said, "Come hang out here. There's several places you can stay there. Just put out your sleeping bag and yada yada yada." And so I went in there, and so there are a few things there. So it's this old building, mostly brick. I've been trying to remember more of this since I knew I was going to be doing this podcast. A lot of the buildings around that area, and maybe Minneapolis as a whole, are made of brick. And so this was this kind of square brick building, first floor, second floor, and then an attic. And he told me as I was going in, and this is the part that I think is bullshit, but that also may have been bullshit, but caught my, obviously as part of the story, is that the people in the neighborhood said that there was a serial killer who lived there and that he was the Green River Killer. And I mean, this is pre-internet, this is pre-book, going to I guess it wasn't pre-book, but it was, hard to like go research it easily. So it was just kind of this running legend there in the neighborhood, the mid 80s, that the Green River Killer had lived in this apartment, or not really an apartment, but like these what would be an apartment building at the time. And so Ken told me about the Green River Killer, and then the first floor had Ken's apartment or Ken's little room, and then this other guy who I knew from the bandbox lived there, and he also told me that there was a serial killer who used to live there, and he was really strange. And I even get a little goosebumps here. This guy said that the guy used to go up into the attic and scream. Just go up there and scream, and like it just got me the wrong way. Anyway,
Yeah.
So I learned that there was a serial killer who used to live there allegedly. I learned he used to like scream when he would like go up in the attic. So I was like primed with that when I went to the house. So I looked at the first floor, the two places. Went to the second floor, which I would spend the night. And this, by the way, has a whole other story beyond this like initial story. So I went into the second floor, and it was mostly open. It was like a few walls. I don't know how to describe it other than it was a building that was being gutted. So there were some walls. There were a lot of I don't even 2x4s is what I'm 2x4. What am I trying to say? Framework for wallboard. So anyway, it was like under construction. Yada yada yada. So those were the first two floors, and the third floor was the attic. And I took the steps up into the attic, and I looked up, and I saw outside, and I thought I was gonna scream. So there was a hole in the roof because they were working on it, but I didn't know that. And so I was primed, thinking there's a serial killer who used to live here. There was a serial killer who allegedly may have killed people here, and he used to go up to the attic and scream. And I walked into the attic and saw the sky, and for some reason it was just bolt of just utter fear, just like shaking fear, really, really scary. So we weren't up there too long. So
I
anyway,
don't know you.
and that's the scariest part of the story. The rest of this is just kind of odd. So the very scary attic thing. So, we do our thing. We're hanging out, hung out and, hung around Minneapolis for a while, came back home. And Ken was like, stay wherever you want. There's a whole bunch of open space here. So you just find your spot and stay there. And so I went to the second floor. And so I don't know if I've mentioned this part yet. So everybody said that this was a haunted building. I'm not sure I've mentioned that yet, but because of, I guess it was clearly kind of haunted because of all this, like these legends about the Green River Killer, or a serial killer is the guy who I knew in the bandbox said. And so I was primed for something, I think I was less easily scared than I am now, because I would never ask this now. But at the time, I put up my sleeping bag and I just said to the room, if there's a ghost, show yourself to me tonight, because I would like to see you. Which again, I would never fucking do that now. I would be if I close to this house now, I would run the fuck away. But
I'm sitting here thinking you don't ever invite them in.
Again, I was in my 20s. But yeah, and I remember being genuinely interested in seeing what the ghost would be like. I wasn't very scared. And again, I would be really scared now, which that's interesting in addition to being kind of funny. So anyway, I was open to it. And so I went to bed, slept in my sleeping bag, and I woke up the next morning and there was a bird in the room. And I didn't think, at the time, I was like, oh, there's a bird in the room. It never occurred to me till later in the day that, oh my God, I asked to see a ghost and that there was a bird in the room, and I've never seen a bird in the room with me ever. It was it was a semi, the attic was open and it was an open floor, that second floor was mostly open. So it wasn't that bizarre that a bird would be sitting in the room with me, but I have never had a bird in the room with me before or since. It's the only time in my life where I've been with a bird. And so I think, I'm not saying that was a ghost, but when people ask me, the closest I've been to seeing a ghost, and I'm in the mood to tell a long story, then I'll tell this story. It's my only encounter with a possible ghost. And maybe the ghost of the Green River Killer or one of his victims or something.
Right? Yikes. Yeah.
Anyway, that's the story. That's
the thought of somebody just, walking up into the attic to have a good rage scream or
I don't know. I found, because there's two frightening things about that. I don't know why it's obviously bizarre behavior, but something about that just going up to the attic and screaming really still kind of just sticks deep in my subconscious. And also not expecting to see the sky and seeing the sky. That was I don't even know how to describe that. It was just
it's just not supposed to be there.
I'm trying to think of a fancy way of putting it, but it's almost like the house knew what was in my brain, knew that I was expecting something weird there, and then gave me something so weird I couldn't eat. Maybe that's it, that I couldn't process it right away, because I'm not supposed to see sky there. I'm supposed to see roof there. Yeah. And so just the inability to process it was just oh my fucking God, what's going on? It was a really scary moment. And
did you only stay there the one night, or did you stay more nights?
Stayed a couple nights. I stayed a couple nights. Nothing. By then, I think I was fairly used to the attic, so it wasn't like it was freaking me out on a regular basis. No bird the second night.
You just asked for it to show itself. You didn't ask for it to stay the whole time.
Come hang out with me. We'll go to the bandbox.
Get a cup of coffee.
Have fun.
Yeah, I imagine there were a lot of cool urban legends and various stories that you would hear working at a place like that.
Yeah. Oh, there was a. Well, this is an interesting story. So there's a guy named, I think his name was Tex, would come in, midnight to 2 or 3 in the morning and stuff, sip a cup of coffee. He'd usually buy something, and he had this. And he was a nice guy. but something was going on. You just couldn't quite figure out what. And then one day he was talking because he had the Southern accent, and his accent like started to like morph, like it just turned into like different accents besides the Southern accent. So that's and then, but the thing that I remember that he said was that just again stuck in my head, and I think it's really sad. He just looked at me and goes, "Does the weather seem different to you now?" And it just seemed he wasn't talking about like the seasons. He was just talking about like reality was changing, and he didn't know what to do about it. Like he was a little freaked out by the fact that the weather seemed different. If that makes any sense. Huh. But anyway, lots of weird interactions like that. It was a great job, but
I worked at a diner here, and I definitely met. So I worked at. It's no longer. There's another one at a different location, but I worked at a Gunther Tooties in Colorado Springs.
Oh yeah.
Academy, yeah, and
at Austin Bluffs.
Academy in Austin Bluffs, yeah.
I went in there so many times.
Yeah,
it's like the little milkshake shop, right?
What's that?
Hamburgers and milkshakes and stuff.
Yeah. I still have the uniform because I used it as a Halloween costume forever. It was like a mint green traditional, the dress that the waitress would use with the pockets and the white. I just forgot the term for it when you're sewing it. Well, no, but yeah, there's these direction darts and stuff like that, darting in it and all of that. And then you'd tie the black thing around your waist with the pockets in it, your little mini apron that would not protect you from anything except, I guess, it pouring on your crotch, I guess. I don't, not much else. And we had to wear bright red lipstick, and we had to pick a name, like an identity and stuff like that. Not to the extent of like Pulp Fiction diner, but I was chiffon to start, and then I could not find like a chiffon scarf, so I switched to Ruby, and Ruby was really way better for me. I had that name tag forever. I think I finally got rid of it. But in that spot, I got a lot of construction workers, including foremen, who would come in there, and they all just for some reason, the general foreman in particular, the guys who are in charge, they seemed to be like these lonely guys, and they would come in and they just wanted their coffee and they just wanted to talk to you. So I had all these conversations. We had bikers who also, like a group of bikers that would come in all the time. They were really nice, super nice guys. But yeah, you meet so many personalities in a place like that. When you work in a place that has personality, you draw people with personality and you hear all of their stories. And I had to be at work at that time. I had to be at work at 6 a.m. or 4:30 a.m. because I was a breakfast waitress. And so I just didn't go to bed because I had insomnia, so that I would take a nap when I got home, and that's when I slept. I would sleep a couple hours. That was it. But, you're getting there in the pitch dark, and these guys are there getting ready for their day. They're hardworking people. They've got calloused hands. They are tired, and they just want coffee, maybe some eggs, and they just want somebody to hear them. They want probably in particular a woman who would sit there and listen to them. And I had a ton of regulars from that. And I got to know so many stories and so many people and so many personalities, and it sucked. The job sucked because I didn't like the folks who worked there. It was really cliquey. Turned out that was just the breakfast bunch, because I took some extra shifts at dinner and they were great. And they were like, oh yeah, the breakfast gals are monsters. They're mean girls. And so I was constantly fighting with them because they wanted you to scooch into chairs and flirt with the men and call them honey and do all this stuff, right? And I'm just not that person. And so I was true to myself. And I ended up, it turns out that a lot of the customers didn't want that shit.
Sure.
And so I ended up kind of inadvertently, not on purpose, with other people's regulars coming over to me. And they would start coming into my spots, and that really pissed off. And I get it. I didn't do anything to do this on purpose. I just wasn't doing the bullshit antics that the rest of them were doing because they couldn't read a room. And I was able to see, like, okay, this person needs this for me instead. So
it seems a little more sincere and like organic than there.
Yes, which is always who I've been. I'm going to be who I am, and that's good, right? Good or bad. But it worked really well there, and I ended up with these regulars. I got a ton of money in tips. They would buy a cup of coffee that was less than $1, right? And then they'd leave me a $5. and so that's not,
That's awesome.
that's a good amount of money. And, but yeah, I enjoy, it wasn't the customers that I didn't enjoy and that I ended up leaving. It was the atmosphere there that was harsh, but I did enjoy talking to people and learning new things and just I love people's stories. And that's the thing. That's why that was a good job for me. So, and I've waitressed since then, and it's the same thing. People open up to me and they tell me things, and I love to hear their stories. So yeah, it just makes me think of that. But like yours, even more genuine and in
it's still there, by the way. If anybody goes to like downtown Minneapolis, the bandbox is there. So I highly recommend it.
Yeah, because you've posted pictures before, right?
I have actually. If I could give a shout out to something, I have a newsletter called the Ort Cloud on Substack that I've been writing for decades. It hasn't always been on Substack, but it's all there. It's like 20 years of writing. But I have on the vertical a bunch of bandbox stories. So if you're ever bored, you want to hear anything about the bandbox, go to the Ort Cloud on Substack.
And that's OORT, right?
OORT, like the actual Ort Cloud.
Okay.
I just to follow back on your story, I had one guy. Oh, I hated him. Would come in and order like just a real simple breakfast. He would put 5 quarters in front of his coffee cup, and as soon as you did something that he didn't like, he'd take away a quarter. I would just push the whole thing towards him. I didn't want his fucking $1.25, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't want your money there, but no. I only had one bad customer there the entire time I worked there. One, and it was a group of teenagers who came in and were showing off for each other and being very demanding and everything. And when they left me a penny on a piece of paper with it just circled. That was the only bad interaction I ever had at that place with a customer.
Wow.
So that's not bad.
A lot of bad interaction.
I know. But yeah, we just had a bunch of working people, like you were saying. Now I wouldn't call General Foreman working poor, but we also had the construction workers and everybody else. But it was in a neighborhood where I didn't have the same like group of people that you did. Mm-hmm. That more like there would be like a downtown kind of atmosphere, right? Where did you get a mix of like business people, or was it in such a place that it really was just?
I wouldn't say a lot of business people. The breakfast there was really good. We were open 24/7, and you get a post bar crowd. Bars closed at 1 in Minneapolis, so you get a post crowd that was, that would be everybody. But yeah, breakfast was a draw because it was so good. We made really good breakfast there.
Yes.
But yeah, it wasn't a lot of suits. It was mostly, flannel shirts and t-shirts. And at winter, another sad thing about it is that like winter's really fucking cold in Minneapolis.
Yeah, it is.
I'm swearing too much.
But like we always do.
But you'd see these people come in the middle of winter and like, I'm not going to kick you out of here. You just see winter in their eyes. You just see this fear of, oh my God, it's cold again. What are we going to do for the next 5 months? Yeah. And yeah, that was like wintertime was just, you just realized that as long as, you're kind of an oasis there. You were there to be an oasis,
And at least you can give them some hot coffee.
Right.
If nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Sure.
I love a personal story.
Yeah. The bandbox. I haven't done that for a long time. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So my story. Oh my God. So first of all, before I start my story, do you remember the woman who murdered the Tejano singer Selena?
Yes, I covered that on the podcast.
Okay, I was pretty sure you had, but I was like, and I didn't want to write her name down because I don't want to give her the shout out. Anyway, at the end of March, she came up for parole. And I just wanted to update that she'd come up for parole. It was denied.
Good.
There was no question. And I don't believe she comes up again for 5 years. So it won't be until 2030. But there's still plenty of people willing to go in and testify.
She was beloved. She was super sweet. And she totally trusted this woman.
Yes. And it was a horrible death.
Yes,
and it was motivated by greed and nothing else. So
There's something about a violation of trust that makes things worse to me.
Yes. And an older woman preying on a younger woman.
Yeah.
Just like, no.
Who was good to her.
Yeah. And that's why she was even there. She was called, I need your help. Anyway. So back to the regularly scheduled mayhem. So the irony of recording the podcast about a possibly cursed church on a day when so many people go to church is not lost on me. It rather delights me, but I'm just that way. So the original source for this story was my True Crime a Day calendar. And if you've never had one of these calendars, if it's a big enough story, it goes over several days.
Okay.
So, you get the big murder on the first day, and then you get some background and it goes through because it won't all fit on one. So this one started with a murder, which I am going to talk about, but it wasn't until the last page that there was like a throwaway remark that said all the other awful stuff that happened at this church. And I was like, wait a minute. What do you mean all this stuff? So that to me, I was like, that's the lead. That is absolutely the lead. So the Emmanuel Baptist Church in San Francisco, here we are back in California, got its start in a rented hall, which is not that unusual in cities. That's where churches get their start. In 1878, the church moved to a permanent location near 22nd Street and Cap, in case anybody here is an aficionado of late 1800s San Francisco street layouts.
No.
You never know. Some listener might care. So looking back, going into the Wayback Machine, California had only been a state for approximately 30 years at this time. Golden Gate Park was less than 10 years old. The San Francisco Public Library, the Pacific Yacht Club, and the YWCA, the Young Women's Christian Association, were all founded that year. So in the rest of the U.S., I found this fascinating, and I might have to look into this later.
Wait, is that what YMCA stands for? Is Young Men's
Christian Association? Yeah.
Huh.
I do that.
Funny, and that's one that stuck around.
Yep.
Okay.
So 1878, that was the year of the last Salem witch trial.
Mm-hmm.
And had no idea it was that recently, that it went that long. So sick. Yeah, it is. So I was I had to stop and let that marinate for a moment. And there were at least 2 different yellow fever epidemics that year. One in New Orleans that killed a few thousand people, but then in the Mississippi River Valley that just killed thousands more. So it was not a banner year by any means.
Depends who you were. If you were a mortician, it was great.
Yes. If you had a mask. Yellow fever is pretty contagious. So anyway, back to Emmanuel Baptist. The church's first pastor in the new location, Reverend Charles Hughes, slashed his own throat with a straight razor.
Oh.
Killed himself.
Jeez.
In the church. The man who replaced him shot himself in the head in the church. Killed himself.
Wow.
Yeah, first 2. Then, the third pastor was a man named Isaac Milton Kalloch.
Milton, that's funny in the middle of this.
So the last name is spelled Kalloch. So I'm going to pronounce it Kalloch. I'm not sure. But he went by I am Kalloch. So he was a young man whose father was also a pastor and was also politically connected in the Working Men's Party. Kalloch the elder was running for mayor, and he and the DeYoungs, who supported a different candidate, engaged in a veritable shit ton of mudslinging, to the extent where the DeYoungs said something horrible about Kalloch's dead father, and he basically called their mother a whore. Oh. So, it's like, wow, you don't know what you're doing, but yo mama was a hoe. So this is how far it went. In August of 1879, Charles DeYoung took a carriage to Metropolitan Church where the elder Kalloch was speaking. And it was probably just a political gathering because it was on a Saturday. So DeYoung sent a message into to Colic, and when the man came out to meet him, shot him in the chest and the hip, which one article called a Victorian era drive-by. I was like, okay. So you can have your fun with that. However, he was in a horse-drawn carriage and he was in a crowd. The church was crowded because this was big. This was the mayoral race. It was a big deal. So there's this huge crowd of people who are on Calic's side. So the people at the church reacted violently, tipped DeYoung's carriage over and pulled him out and started beating him. I mean, not surprisingly, really, but he had to get himself arrested to escape. He had to throw himself at the police to be arrested to get out of there.
Yeah.
So after this, he fled the city until after the election. DeYoung did. And Calic won. But after the election, why, I don't know, DeYoung came back and began producing pamphlets defaming Calic again. Just producing all this smack talk.
Yeah. Propaganda.
Yeah, but he'd already been elected. So on April 23rd, 1880, I.M., the younger Calic, the Emmanuel Baptist pastor, showed up at the man's office and shot him 5 times. So 3 violent crimes in 3 years at this church. So it did quiet down. And it does that weird echo thing is,
Yeah.
it doesn't echo all the time, just once in a while.
And it's like it shouts at you.
Yes. I don't like being shouted at. So the church, things quieted down for a bit. In 1890, the church moved to a new building on Bartlett Street, and there were a few peaceful years. In 1894, Reverend John George Gilbert took over the church. And on Saturday, April 13th, 1895, a group of women gathered at the church to get it ready for the big Easter celebration the next day. So I would ask of you, picture in your mind a church lady. So it's not hard. Even if you don't go to church, you can picture a little old church lady.
Dana Carvey.
Yes. Maybe a little bit matronly looking, maybe pink cheeked, and, bakes an awesome crumb cake. That's the kind of church lady we're. Okay. So one of these women goes searching for extra prayer books, and she opens a storage closet and finds the body of a young parishioner whose name was Minnie Williams, posed like a statue. She had been strangled, stabbed, and sexually assaulted. She had been gagged with an article of her underclothing, shoved down her throat with a sharp stick. There was blood everywhere, and one report said that the knife used to stab her was still sticking out of her chest when they found her. So at first, here's the sad part. At first, these poor church ladies thought they were looking at the body of Blanche Lamont, a 21-year-old who was studying to become a school teacher and was a member of the congregation who had been missing for 10 days. After Minnie Williams was identified, a search of the church grounds, the police searched the church grounds and turned up the body of Lamont at the top of a staircase in the bell tower. She was naked with her hands clasped in front of her and her head propped up on 2 blocks. One of them said like a medical cadaver. She had been strangled but not sexually assaulted, and on her body were several deep bruises from her killer. So it turns out that Williams and Lamont were friends, and 23-year-old Theodore Durant had been dating both of them. He and Williams had fought when he pressured her for sex and she refused. When Lamont was reported missing after failing to return home one night, now she lived with her aunt and was studying to be a school teacher, so it was very much a big deal that she didn't come home. It wasn't like today when you could disappear for a few days. It was an absolute scandal. Durant suggested he was immediately there, helped look for her, and said to the aunt, maybe she was kidnapped and coerced into prostitution. His second suggestion was that she had left of her own free will to become a prostitute. Yeah. But the day after she was last seen, Durant had been seen coming down the steps from the belfry by the church choir director and organist who was there practicing. He said Durant looked shaky and pale. Durant claimed he had climbed up there to investigate a potential gas leak. Police quickly arrested him. They were just like, no. It just didn't take long. I don't know his full name. He's went by the initials WHT Theodore Durant. He was a medical student and he was the superintendent of the church's Sunday school. Yeah. Several witnesses had seen him with both girls. He denied any involvement, but when police searched his home, they found Williams's purse in his coat. And at least one pawnbroker testified that Durant had tried to pawn jewelry belonging to Lamont after her disappearance. So it was predominantly circumstantial, but he was the last person seen with them both. While Durant enjoyed an excellent reputation, assisting the Sunday school director, going to medical school, he also enlisted in the Army Signal Corps. The women of the congregation had a different story to tell after all this came out. Apparently, he made aggressive sexual advances on young women in the congregation, and most of them were too scared to tell anyone. One said she found him naked in the church library once. He was also known to frequent the local brothels, where it said he had a reputation of, in the middle of the act, killing birds and smearing the blood over himself.
Ooh.
How do you just So this is where I'm reminded of the wise words of true crime expert Donnie Wahlberg, who said, if you see something, say something. Wahlberg. Sorry. Wahlberg, who gained his extensive expertise through several years of playing police officers on television, now has his own show called Very Scary People, where he talks about serial killers. The look on your face just makes this worth every minute. He must know what he's talking about because Dr. Oz had him on his show, which is called Oz True Crime. What's going to true crime?
To talk about Charles Manson. So another callback to the earlier story. He invited Wahlberg into his crime lab, which is a very open, airy television studio decked out with beakers and bottles of a light blue liquid that looks like Cool Mint Listerine. I don't know what it's supposed to be. And you can't get more scientific than that. Amy made me watch this. Just part of it. And then when I was doing this, I was like, look, it just falls. She's like, you have to use this somehow. Now, I do want to say, when I was researching and finding this, it was before Dr. Oz got sworn into his new position and opened his mouth and let foul shit fall out. So I don't know if you've heard.
No.
Oh, yeah. Basically, just don't get sick. That's his advice.
Great.
If you don't get sick, just be well. Do better. And then you won't use up our healthcare resources. I'm not even kidding. Okay, so back to Durant. Yeah. So this was a huge, as you might expect, this was a huge story across the country, sometimes being referred to as the crime of the century. But I think other things wipe that out later. Newspapers gave it lots of space. They ran drawings of Durant's face, but they also ran pictures of his murderous hands. Yeah. Society matrons filled the courtroom. And this just killed me. One woman allegedly left her husband after he refused to continue reading the full court transcripts to her each day, which took hours. He did continue to read the summary, which his wife deemed unsatisfactory. So she took half the furniture and moved out. He wouldn't read her the transcripts. And during the 2-month trial, Durant received a flood of fan mail from female admirers.
Oh, that always kills me.
That just is so awful. It only took the jury 22 minutes to find him guilty in November of 1895. While the prosecution did lack physical evidence, as I mentioned earlier, the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. Durant himself didn't do himself any favors when he testified in his own defense. The man liked to hear himself speak. He gave these long, rambling explanations about how he couldn't possibly be guilty. And the details, each one was more complex than the last, but the details would conflict with other details in the story. He spun convoluted conspiracy theories that nobody believed, and his lawyer tried to throw the church pastor under the bus and say that he had done it. So he was sentenced to death and he was hanged. But before he died, he gave a rambling 4-minute speech, and at some point actually said something about, no, you cannot take me until I've had my say. But that was in the following January. He still claimed his innocence. He never admitted, he never confessed. None of the local mortuaries would accept his body, so it had to be sent to Los Angeles for cremation. And the neighborhood wanted the church torn down immediately, but it stood through the earthquake of 1906 and all the terrible fires that followed. And it was finally dismantled in 1915.
Wow.
I was like, that just was a bad luck. That was not a good church.
Yeah, I guess what that keeps happening, like the pastors or whatever offing themselves like a possession story or something.
Yes.
Because wow, or man, the people who were coming to that church were a real big problem. I don't know.
I could you keep going to a church if the first two pastors killed themselves? I couldn't find anything about why.
Oh,
but so my sources were my True Crime A Day calendar, crimereads.com, Wikipedia, of course, true crime author Bob Calhoun, and the San Francisco Gate. So I just was like, the church was haunted. I am convinced.
That's a more logical explanation than two guys showing up and like killing themselves. And like, what was the within like a few years, these two pastors, or
within 3 years, it was the two pastors killed themselves, and the next pastor killed his father's political heckler.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. All right.
I don't know how you can be a man of God and think it's okay to go to someone's office and shoot them.
I can fill in the blank and make that statement about a lot of things.
Well, yes.
I can be a man of God and molest young boys.
Yes.
So
or young girl.
None of that goes together.
No.
So yeah, it's all but it speaks to psychology a lot about how much you can repress, deny, and rationalize anything in the human brain. On one hand, that's amazing. On the other hand, that is deeply problematic.
And it was funny because there were several witnesses who had seen him with both of the girls the last time they were seen alive, because one, he was walking somewhere and somebody actually heard them arguing and had to break them up and said he was not behaving like a gentleman. And in the other one, he was riding on the streetcar with her. So multiple people saw them get off and walk away together, obviously together, So
that's the thing. Eyewitnesses are only good for so much, but like after the fact, you see how many people heard it. Mm-hmm. I did have a thought about the lady that witnessed the one girl being taken, and I was like, I wonder if she actually did call the police and got blown off, and that just wasn't reported. Like, who knows? Because they were blowing off other things.
Yeah,
true.
And LA is a big city, so I don't know. But well, are they gone? Yeah. Then what do you want us to do? Like, well, I don't know. Come look around.
I've gotten that response.
Really?
It wasn't for a violent crime, though.
I once called the cops as a teenager because something had pounded on the window behind me, and right before the cops arrived, my cat. I discovered my cat had gotten outside, and it was my cat jumping up and pounding on the window. Because then I finally caught the cat doing it. But I was there babysitting I was sitting in a rocker with my infant sister.
Oh.
So I would have been 14 because she was born when I was 14. And rocking, and something's hitting the window behind me while I'm there alone with 4 children because my parents were out. I called them. They were very nice to me because I was, as soon as they got there, I was like, I'm so sorry, it was a cat. I tried to call the non-emergency line and told them. And they were like, we'd rather come out for a false call than not come out for a real call. And I'm like, see, that's the attitude you should always have. But it was a calmer time then. No, not really. At that house, we weren't even in a bad neighborhood. We were in Rock Rimmon. I witnessed a guy get robbed outside the basement window. I heard a kerfluffle as I was watching probably Nick at Night at the time. Went and peered out the window, and 2 guys were mugging him. And then he ended up coming to our house and asking to call the police. And then my mom and I, when my dad was on a business trip, heard the most horrendous shrieking, like terrified, awful shrieking. Go look outside, and there is a man chasing a woman with a bat. Damn. We called the police. And they were out of sight fast. Like, I don't even know where they went. That's the thing. Like, okay. So, yeah, there were a lot of little things. I was in that neighborhood, Rock Rimmon.
Okay.
Which people look on as a fairly nice neighborhood. But yeah, I got stalked in that neighborhood too. So that was the big blue van stalking. For over a year. He followed me home from school. And then when I switched to high school the next year and came on the bus, he figured it out after a few days and be waiting at the bus stop to follow me home.
Ooh.
Yeah.
What could you?
I told my parents. I don't think they ever called the police. I don't think they believed me. I don't know. Even though that was not the first kidnapping, or stalking or anything that I've been through. But
so what happened? He just quit doing it?
He just quit one day. And
nobody believed you? You were just like, kept this by yourself? And
yeah.
That's insane.
I would watch him, and then at one time I sat there and threw rocks at him until he drove away. It was bizarre.
That's insane.
He never physically tried to grab me, but I also kept my distance. So I was very careful, but I had to walk home by myself from middle school. And this guy there was a path through a field. Now there's houses there, but it used to just be a field across from the school. And I'd have to walk up the path and then walk down the street, and he'd be parked on the street waiting for me.
Oh, that's so creepy. So
then I'd walk through the field or whatever. And then I'd run across the street to get home. So yeah. I mean, it's weird because when you mention Rock Rimmon, people are like, that's a safe neighborhood. And I'm like, all this shit happened there. We moved there to get away from all the stuff happening in Columbia, Maryland, where I live, which is right outside Baltimore.
But wasn't the Phantom Pooper in Rock Rimmon?
You have to tell me about the Phantom Pooper.
Yeah, I don't remember.
This was just a few years ago.
Oh.
I believe it was a woman. They eventually figured out it was a woman, but somebody would be out running in the morning and would just stop and poop in these people's yard or on their driveway.
Oh, I vaguely recall this. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was insane.
I've since read about that with joggers and how for some reason, I don't even remember. I read it and now it's gone because I don't jog. I don't care. So, but I read that the diarrhea is common. I too, for some reason.
I have to admit, I did that once. I was a kid, I don't know, junior high maybe, and I just had to poop really, really bad. There was no way I'd get to home in time, and I pooped. It was like the corner of somebody's lawn. I remember feeling guilty.
Would you do? You wouldn't do it in the middle of it. And it was on TV. It was on the news because it was the Phantom Pooper.
Yeah. And it was multiple times. That's crazy.
In the same place. I would feel targeted. I would wait outside I'm a vengeful petty bitch. I would wait outside with a hose and be like, go ahead. Poop on my driveway.
Poop in my lawn.
One more time.
Make my day.
Maybe a fire hose, something a little higher pressure than a hose, but God. Yeah, that was not that long ago.
Yeah. So Rock Rimmon isn't as safe as people like to pretend it is. I don't know if we would have gotten robbed, but we had a Doberman, so that was never a problem. But and I did also witness the maintenance man at the apartments across the street from us walking around sniffing the bathing suits. And then I told my dad. My dad called the apartment complex and was like, yo, this isn't okay. I don't know. I don't remember if he called the cops too or what, but he was like, no, this guy's a predator and you guys need to do something about it now. Because he'd literally just walk, because they had a pool and they would hang their bathing suits on the over the railing.
Well, when I lived in North Carolina, one time we had a clothesline because we're poor, and it's
just looking at my clothes hanging over the railing because I drive them over the railing because I don't have a clothesline.
So we had a clothesline in the backyard, and it was getting dark, and I could hear thunder. It was going to rain, so I run out at dusk, and I pull all my clothes in. And I think I just left them in the basket. And I get up the next morning, and I go to put my clothes away, and I realize all my underwear has been stolen.
Yeah. You're like, it was clean, sirs.
It was clean.
Yeah.
And, but we did that same apartment complex. We had a peeper guy who would come and you'd look up and he would be pressing his face against your living room window. And just, as far as I know, it never escalated, at least at that apartment complex.
Yeah.
He would just be looking in. If you didn't there to TV, it wasn't like
Well, and I think I might have mentioned on here before, but who knows? When I worked at that diner and I had to be to work at 4:30 or 6, depending on the shift, because we opened at 6. So somebody had to go and do all the pre-cleaning and stuff. So that was usually like 2 people had to get there at 4:30. But I had a dude then who was, because I was up all night and we couldn't afford curtains. So we were just, even though we were technically a second floor apartment, the first floor was, partially sunken.
Yep.
And so our porch was exactly at the height where a man could look through over it. His head would be above the porch level. Right. And so he would just sit there and watch me. And I ended up getting my mom gave me like this old billy club that had been my great grandfather's or something. And he had like beaten a man with it. And so I ended up in court and told the judge to like go fuck himself. And he was cantankerous. And anyway, so I had his antique billy club, an actual billy club that I kept in the car. And then I'd walk back with it and I'd walk to the car with it. It got stolen when our car got broken into at those apartments. But anyway, the guy would sit there and stare at me because I'd be sitting there with the light on TV and working on something. And I'd look over and he's just standing there staring in. And I was like, I'm not going to make it to work one of these days. But no, I never actually got accosted by him in person. He'd wait and just look in the windows until I had to go to work.
That is so
always
creepy.
Like, great, I'm going to go outside now. I have a pocket knife and a billy club. This is what I'm going to do. So good times.
Yeah.
Good times. Yeah.
We had a guy standing on our porch once. This is when I was a parent, just like standing, like lights off. Because at the time we didn't turn our porch lights on. And just like standing on our porch. Nothing happened. Like, I called the police and he was gone by then. But what a frightening vision. Just a little like it, just to not expect that, to see it.
No. And I imagine if you hadn't been in there and been visibly seen him, it could have resulted in it. Hey, is there anybody here? I'm going to burglarize this house or whatever.
Right. Yeah, it was scary.
Yeah. I haven't really had a bunch of creepy stuff happen in the neighborhood I live in now. There's stuff. My life is never boring. So there's not by a long shot. There's always something. But no, like compared to Rock Rimmon, it's been a lot safer. But I just found it so crazy that all this stuff would happen when we had literally fled Maryland to get away from all the crazy stuff that happened to me there. And then it was just like, we would like you to be a fiction writer. Here we go. Here are some more traumatic occurrences.
We're going to keep your life interesting.
Yes. Why not? I mean, I don't want it to be boring, but I would like it to be more boring. Sometimes.
Less exciting.
That's right. I would like less things to happen. It's great.
Yeah.
But then now I just want to live out in the wilderness where there's nobody around me. That'd be great.
I do not want to live in the wilderness.
You don't want to.
Because there's sketchy cell service. and no good grocery stores.
No good grocery stores. Hey, when we're at the cabin, we go to the dollar store for some of our groceries. That's the closest store that there is. You can go to a corner store, or you can go to the dollar store, or you can drive to Alamosa, which is like an hour away, to get groceries.
I do not want to drive an hour to get groceries.
I don't mind it. I eat less when I do.
Well, there's that.
But we stop in wow.
You stop at that place and get the meals.
We stop there, but we usually stop at the grocery store in the the big town right off I-25. My God, it starts with the Walsenburg. There's 2 grocery stores there. There's a Safeway and there's some other market. And we stop at one of those and pack up some food and then go up there, because once I'm there, I don't want to leave particularly.
I could do it for a week. I do not want to do it for the rest of my life.
No. You're shopping your memoir, right?
I'm sorry?
Are you shopping your memoir right now?
No, I've had some luck publishing like chapters of it. So right now I'm kind of shopping out chapters. I've had a couple of chapters of it published, and I am working on, and I got I think this happens commonly, but I did get nominated for a pushcart prize for one of them.
Nice.
Yeah, so we'll say that. I think that happens a lot. I think like tens of thousands of people get nominated. Still, I don't care.
It's still an achievement.
And I'm trying to teach myself how to write flash memoir, if that makes any sense. Where I'm taking from the memoir and just trying to boil one down and just boil it down into 1,000 words.
Yeah, because I got a long time ago. That's something that I wanted to kind of hone and play with too. And just, I always have so many other ideas, right? That I'm like, okay, I got to write this first. But one of the things that got published was just like a little flash memoir piece. And it's pretty much a vignette, I guess I would say. And it's just a moment in time when I was taking care of my grandma when we brought her home to die at home. So, and it's just like this moment in the one night, and it got published right away when I submitted it. And I felt like I should do this more often. And yet here I am, probably a decade later, still haven't done that. But
it's really an interesting way to write. It's really hard, but if you get it's finding the right moments, finding that takes exactly 1,000 words to tell. But it's really gratifying once you get it right, as you clearly did. Just a cool way to write.
Yeah, because it's just like a glimpse. It's a moment in time, and
you've got to hone it down just to the absolute essentials. And what you choose to put in and what ends up staying out is just really interesting. Really, in kind of a window into how your own mind works and what you're choosing to leave in that tail and what you're choosing to edit out.
Yeah. There used to be, just flash fiction in general, a kind of a blog hop every other month, I think is what it was doing when I was participating. It was called the WEP blog hop or something, which stood for their website, which was Write, Edit, Publish. Uh-huh. And they just throw out, here is your prompt, here's what to use or what the theme is. And you can write a story, you can do poetry, you can do memoir, you could post photography that matches. It was just very much like an artistic thing. And I really loved it. I didn't do it as much as I would have liked to. So I didn't do every single one. But that's a really good exercise, just in general.
Yeah.
Is to do that.
This is an odd thing. I hesitate to say it. I don't like to respond to prompts. And I don't know, it's something about having a piece of writing that you're not trying to get published. You don't have a concrete purpose for it. It just feels like I'm wasting, I don't know, something by writing for a prompt rather than writing for an end project. I know that doesn't make much sense, but I'm just really I sometimes do them, like if I'm in a class where that's going on, but I'm really skittish of writing on prompts, or writing like at the beginning of a class where they say write 5 sentences and they say okay and they move on to the next thing. I just feel like that's not giving what you wrote enough, I don't know, enough respect, I guess.
Interesting.
Does that make any sense? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. And it's funny because I like to write occasionally I can write really clean to a prompt. I think it appeals to the tism. And it's like, oh, we have restrictions. If I have restrictions, I can do a thing like nobody's business. But then on the other hand, I can't even plot to save my life, right? I will write whatever is coming into my head, and that's that. So it's kind of funny. It's like either constrained or I have to be completely free to do whatever I want to without my own restrictions on it, even. Right. So it's always interesting. Everybody has this different approach in the way their brain works.
Uh-huh.
Mine just has multiple. I told somebody the other day, I was like, there are literally 2 wolves inside me, and one is autism and one is ADHD, and you don't know which one you're going to get on any given day.
Number one.
That's right. So,
Right.
woo! Oh, that's what we're doing today. So I was like, I can be both spontaneous and incredibly regimented. It's just, yeah.
I'm such a bad plotter because I'm horrible at plotting. That I now, and I'm still doing this, if I'm writing a short story, which is nearly always, I have to write down I make myself write down the complete plot at the end of the story.
Yeah.
And I can change it, but I have to write down what I change. In other words, I have to give myself some sort of a plot. Otherwise, I'll just wander off into La La Land and just like I need the plot to keep me on track.
Gotcha.
And that's how novels are written.
We'll see.
Yeah, no, not even there. Even if I write mystery, I will if I think of something later, it's something I'll go back and wrap back in afterwards, like I cannot even plot to that point. I used to get so salty when my teachers required me to do an outline, and I was like, that the story's not going to be anything like the outline, right? And so, they were just like, do what you gotta, but you gotta turn in an outline ahead of time so that I know you know how to do it. And I'm like, fine. And then I turn and goes, there's one thing in here from my outline, and I would like you to see it. It is in the 3rd paragraph. It's right there. So, yeah. So then also, if we didn't have to if we could turn them in all together, I would outline it afterwards and turn in the outline afterwards.
I got asked for a detailed outline for a book proposal, and I wrote it because I didn't have it. I was like, they're like, well, I'm interested in this story. And I was like, it's not finished yet. Because I thought, well, it's all up here. None of it's written, but they wanted it. So I wrote the whole outline, set it off, and they liked it, but didn't want it. And I was like, well, that's good because now I hate it. I don't want to follow this outline. I absolutely hate this. I can't do it.
Yeah.
That was the Girl Scouts of the Apocalypse.
Oh, yeah.
Which, who knows, someday I may go back and write, and everybody's like, it has to be YA. I'm like, no, it's from the Girl Scout. And it wasn't going to be the Girl Scouts, but yeah, it was from the leader's point of view, not the girls.
It's a great title.
Yeah, there was like a big famous horror novel in the last few years on an island and it's Boy Scouts or whatever. And that was an adult novel from whatever. I can't remember who it was or what it was. I remember, wow, it was good. I think it was pretty crazy. Now I can't remember what it was. But anyway, my point being, I'm pretty sure it wasn't YA.
Yes.
There can be children in a story and it not be a children's story.
And it's not from their point of view and it's not about them. It's really hard to kill them though.
Girl Scouts?
Yes.
Says you.
Yeah. No, it's really hard to kill off children in your story for me anyway. And then I did all this research because it was a post-apocalyptic thing. And you have all these preteens with braces on. So one of them figures out how to because you got to get them off at some point. You can't just leave them there for the rest of your life.
Right.
So one of them figures out how to get them out.
Oh, they just pulled them off when I got them taken off. It's just glued pretty much with like really good tooth cement or something. Because I had them once and they gave them to me too early. And then the next person pulled them off and put new ones on. And then I got them removed again. That was the torture dentist. Torture orthodontist. I
really did like, though, I had one of the Girl Scouts kill an elderly dementia patient by mistake.
Wow. Dark.
There you go. There's a little glimpse inside MB's head.
Oh.
People who are listening are going, I think I'm glad she didn't ever finish that.
Why don't they kill people in Bubba Hotep? And it's funny.
Yes.
Just
It was, I thought it was funny, but I don't think anybody ever read that. I don't think that was ever submitted to people to be, here,
Bubba
give me
Hotep?
feedback. No, mine.
Oh, I was like,
No, Bubba Hotep is, yes. I love Bubba Hotep. But yeah, I did never say to anybody, read the scene and tell me what you think.
Why not?
Who knows? I got distracted by something shiny, probably.
I like the idea of a Girl Scout like helping people in the apocalypse, helping people out with their dental stuff because nobody else, because they'd just be stuck there. It'd be worthless.
You could make a badge for that.
Yeah.
That would be a badge or a patch or whatever
You're going to call them.
That's right. Then they're like, it would have braces on it. They're like teeth with braces on it. And a wire pulled halfway off.
A bloody molar hanging off the side.
Yeah.
Maybe the patch would just be a bloody molar.
It's true Beverly Hills in hell.
Yeah. Well, it could be like you could have a Girl Scout troop in the apocalypse where you did earn things like you would, because people would need to have to learn dentistry, like you would have to learn how to pull a tooth. So.
Look at that. See, we're just brainstorming.
But I hadn't gone that far in the apocalypse. It was as it happened and they were on a camping trip. And the woman who's in charge of them is just like, for fuck's sake, what else can go wrong? She doesn't like because it was kind of a survivalist troop. So she doesn't like the people who are running it. She doesn't like half the girls. She doesn't like camping.
Why was she a troop leader? I know I don't like the things, so I do not go be the troop leader.
I don't like the things. I was the troop leader. I may be projecting a little here, okay? Just a bit.
Okay. That's all right. That's okay. All right. That's probably a good place to
end.
A good place to end. On that note, thank you, Rob, for coming out here. Look up his holy crap, Orc Cloud. And his stories. And if you really want to look up that alien, damn it, I can't remember what it's called. I was trying to look at my shelf.
Monster Road Trip, was that it?
Yeah, Monster Road Trip.
Monster Road Trip. Yeah, it's a really good. Like we can't remember it, but it is a really good.
Cute. I like the the cover. Jamie does the best covers.
There were good stories.
That's a really good cover.
Yeah,
because I had that one.
Yeah. So check that out. Great, both of us at once. So, and thank you everybody for listening. We will talk at you. Yes. And in fact, our next episode will be the one that we record live at Pikes Peak Writers Conference, I believe. So
wish us well, because that's an experiment in the unknown.
And also knowing how few people show up tonight things at the conference anyway. We'll see how many. We've heard from one person. I've heard from two people. They'll definitely be there, but that's it. So yeah, wish us luck. And that'll be airing. This should be airing May 15th.
Yes, and that one
will air June 15th. And I will be waving from the UK when that happens. Yes. All right.
This was a lot of fun. So thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
Find us on Facebook and Instagram or at our website, mysteriesmonstersmayhem.com.
Please like, rate, and review, follow, and share wherever your favorite podcasts are downloaded.
Thank you for listening and supporting our podcast. We'll be back with more shenanigans.